What's up, everyone? This is Rajan Nanavati from HailToTheDistrict.com, and given the news from earlier today regarding the Washington football team releasing quarterback Dwayne Haskins less than 2 seasons after making him the 15th overall pick in the 2019 NFL Draft, I kind of wanted to get out some final thoughts about him in sort of a post-mortem of his career in Washington. Now, if you listen to the last episode of the Hail to the District podcast, and I hope you're a loyal subscriber, though you can easily change that if you aren't, you heard me and Pat go in pretty hard about Haskins, given an admittedly pathetic performance that he had in yesterday's loss against the Carolina Panthers. And as cathartic as it was to get out all of those frustrations, today's release gave us the gift of being able to kind of take a step back and look at things from a disassociated standpoint versus having to kind of agonize over him being our problem or continuing to be our problem moving forward. So I'm going to start off by what I was saying on the podcast that I referenced, that Haskins has light years, and I want to emphasize light years, that he has to travel on his journey towards becoming an NFL quarterback. His accuracy as a passer is erratic at best, largely because his footwork is absolutely atrocious. He has no concept of adjusting the speed of his throws based on the situation. He still believes that he can rifle every throw in between multiple defenders to a guy who's not open because he has the arm strength to do so. And there's just way too many instances of Haskins literally staring down a receiver to that point, seeing the guy heavily covered and thinking to himself, fuck it, I'm going to rifle this throw in any way and hope for the best. I said this in the podcast and I'll repeat it again. He's all arm and no skill. But I will say this, which is something that I've also repeatedly said in numerous episodes of the Hail to the District podcast. The thing with Haskins is that I keep coming back to one thing, which really hurts in terms of why he or how he finds himself in this situation today. And that's the fact that he clearly wants to be good. He genuinely cares about being a good quarterback. You can see that it's really important to him to be a successful quarterback. You could see it written all over his face in that post-game press conference that he unfortunately did from his house, kind of ghosting the media after the game yesterday, instead of following the traditional protocol for the starting quarterback. But you could just see that he's so incredibly disappointed from himself. I mean, he was borderline broken, and actually that borderline caveat may be totally inaccurate, if not irrelevant. Like, he was basically a broken player. And to that end, like, he's not Jamarcus Russell, if you will, in the sense that his priorities are just as much about buying bling and drinking lean and partying with, nefarious types off the field as they were about being a competent quarterback. Although with Russell, he only cared about all of those things. He genuinely did not give a rat's ass about being a viable quarterback, but that's neither here nor there, or at least that's a polar opposite from what Dwayne Haskins is today. But with all of that being said, I also think Haskins has no clue about the responsibilities associated with being a quarterback in the NFL, let alone a successful quarterback in the NFL. I hearken back to one quote that was uttered by Hall of Fame college basketball coach Bobby Knight. I love this quote. It's one of my favorite quotes of all time, just in general. And that is, the key isn't the will to win. Everybody has the will to win. It's the will to prepare to win that is important. And to that end, I don't think that Haskins understands what it really entails to become a professional quarterback. In college, you can get by with superior athletic gifts. In the NFL, as everyone will tell you, everyone has those gifts. And what differentiates those players who are successful as pros versus those who are successful in college, as the name implies, are those who take the professional approach to their craft. And I just don't believe that idea has sunk into Haskins' head. And if you want a very good case in point of this, think of the difference Patrick Mahomes made sitting behind Alex Smith for a year, soaking up so much of how Alex Smith, the consummate professional, approached the position, and taking those learnings and applying it to becoming a shockingly good player so early when he had a long road to travel himself, coming from Texas Tech to becoming an NFL quarterback so early on in his career. Compare that to Haskins, who obviously hasn't sat behind Alex Smith to that same extent or in that same circumstance, but he hasn't done anything of that sort. He hasn't even come close. Instead, he's too busy posting things on social media, promoting himself or whatever the fuck his brand is supposed to be. And I believe that's a large function of the fact, at least in large part, that he's just so woefully immature, which his track record has demonstrated time and time again. But I'll also say this, which again I alluded to in our last podcast episode. There's a bigger story here to be revealed, and I firmly believe that. Specifically, I think there are a bunch of people in the Dwayne Haskins camp who are more interested in trying to ingratiate themselves with Haskins, seeing him as a proverbial cash cow, and in doing so, they're basically being those sycophantic hype men who are only telling Haskins what he wants to hear and how he's the greatest thing since sliced bread, or perhaps he's better than sliced bread. And if you dig further, I'm not the only one who believes this. In fact, just today on ESPN's Get Up television show, which I ordinarily wouldn't recommend for anyone, but I thought it was really interesting, if not coincidental / serendipitous / whatever you want to call it, that former NFL personnel executive Louis Riddick made a comment. And mind you, Louis Riddick was a big proponent of Haskins from the day he left Ohio State, or even before the pre-draft process through the start of this season. And Riddick made a comment to the effect of something not being right in Haskins' life about the decision-making process that he demonstrates and how he approaches the quarterback position and his off-the-field choices. And to double down on that, in the same segment, Adam Schefter made a comment, and let's not forget, when it comes to NFL perspective, Schefter knows basically everything. Schefter made the comment about Haskins needing to get out of the area, needing to get away from some of the people, either presently or in his life, or some people that are guiding him at this point in his life. And he was basically being the conduit for what the organization was saying. Both of these individuals, as referenced, are very well connected in the NFL. They're very well connected to the Washington organization. So when they make comments like these, they resound very loudly to me. And I think it comes back to one thing, that Haskins is clearly enamored with the glitz and the glam that comes with being a highly touted, highly hyped NFL quarterback or NFL young prospect in the league or whatever. But far worse than that is the fact that he's got people who are just as enamored with it as Haskins is. Think about the people he was trying to sneak into the team hotel or whatever it was that caused him to violate the first COVID protocol, and then him being coaxed into going to whatever the stupid-ass party was last weekend with a bunch of hired guns. That's a politically correct way of saying, other types of employees who are very clearly wearing Haskins branded paraphernalia in some of the photos that were leaked on social media. Those aren't the people that are going to tell Haskins that he looks comically incompetent compared to so many of his young quarterbacking contemporaries in the NFL today, or that he's dangerously close to being out of the NFL completely for good at the age of 22 or 23 or whatever it is he is right now. Those are the people who are going to be riding this gravy train, honestly, as long as they can. And if Haskins does find himself out of the NFL way too soon, those are the people that are going to vanish from his life. Again, they're just treating him as their gravy train, their cash cow, whatever metaphor you want to use, when they really don't give a damn about him or his success as far as outside of him generating those checks from an NFL team. So, again, I'll repeat one thing when it comes to Haskins, that from a raw talent standpoint, he has all the tools to be a semi-viable player in the NFL. But I don't have much hope for him being anything more than a journeyman type of quarterback in the NFL, or a career backup journeyman type player, because of the circumstances that he finds himself in, or more importantly, that he's kind of put himself into. Also, as a quick aside, I want to put to rest this idea, when I'm talking about the talent standpoint, that Haskins wouldn't have gone in the top round, or the first round, I should say, of the 2019 NFL draft if Washington didn't take him. Washington did not take him, excuse me. That's nothing but revisionist history. If you go back and look at the actual circumstances leading up to the draft, many people had him pegged to the New York Giants at the number 6 overall pick when they took Daniel Jones. I don't want to go down that road because I don't want to start ranting about Daniel Jones and the fact that he turned out to be the better quarterback than Haskins when you go back and look at things. But more importantly, Haskins was a top 25, top 30 at worst prospect on nearly any reputable big board you can find on the internet. And go back and check if you don't believe me. In particular, there were two teams, being the Oakland Raiders, the then Oakland Raiders, and the Denver Broncos, who were very much in the mix to potentially take him if he had made it past the spot where Washington took him. But that's then, this is now. So in terms of Haskins' career moving forward, to use a movie metaphor, if you happen to be a fan of this film franchise like I am, think of Rocky III. Haskins has to get away from the people in his life right now. He's got to get into some grungy gym where he's surrounded by a whole bunch of hungry people who may not be as talented as he is, but they've got that fire, they've got that hunger, they've got the, dare I say, the eye of the tiger. And those are the things that he simply lacks right now. He's lost it along the way into getting lost in this hype monster. And he needs to kind of immerse himself in those surroundings and come out as a completely transformed person, in getting away from those influences in his life. And he's got to do that from a physical perspective. Obviously, that's what the metaphor would imply. But he's also got to do that from a professional development perspective. He has to understand what it means to be an NFL quarterback, a professional in the working world. Think of how professionals like you and I approach our jobs. And simply put, he has to think of it that he's a grown-up with grown-up responsibilities. You are a grown-up. This isn't college anymore. Your approach has to change. I get that the deck has been stacked against Haskins since the day he arrived in the NFL. He arrived with a coaching staff who was far busier than covering their own asses and trying to squeeze out whatever wins they could to retain their own jobs, and thus didn't have a modicum of interest in developing him as a professional. This past offseason, with the COVID pandemic marring everything, he couldn't be around anyone else. He lost a lot of development time, and the current coaching staff couldn't get a true chance to assess and understand Haskins, his development or his lack thereof, until they saw him basically in August. But Haskins can't exacerbate that situation with his own immaturity, and just the same with those sinister influences in his life, making his transition even more difficult than it already has been. In the end, I'm sad to see that Haskins basically ended up as another historic draft bust for the Washington franchise. But because of everything that I've said, and everything that he's done, or hasn't done, I guess, I'm not overly sad to see him go. As a human being, I do hope for the best for him. But he's got to take a long look at himself, his circumstances, and most notably, the people that he's surrounded with himself with, and what they're doing to his life. Fortunately or unfortunately, sometimes we all have to hit rock bottom before we make those tough choices or those tough decisions in our life. And I think it's safe to say that for Haskins, he's very close to that point, if he's not at that point already. So anyway, thanks so much for making it through with me, I should say, all the way to the end of this video. Make sure you click that like button, hit the thumbs up like button if you like this video. If you haven't done so already, do subscribe to our channel. I'm going to continue to post some content on us. We've got stuff from our weekly podcast, so hope you guys dig that. And if you haven't already, make sure you follow us on Twitter at HailToDC. That's HAILTODC. But until next time, this is Rajan signing off.